Lord of the Mysteries. Chapter 883. Demigod's Appraisal. In the book world, just as Klein appeared in the city outskirts, he immediately took out remnant parts of the dark red soil and picked up a withered branch. Using raw divination, he found the Tuttensis II mummy. He was worried that this manifestation of hexes would harm the residents here. Although the book world didn't have any lack of sequence 5 Beyonders, and the Tuttensis II mummy remained in a muddled state having lost the stimulus from Azek's copper whistle, it was still a demigod when it was alive. The hexes that its corpse produced after his death were bound to be extraordinary. Even Klein himself didn't dare approach it if not for the anti-hex golden bead that Sharon had given him. Of course, Klein had also weighed the consequences before deciding on using Grozel's travels to steal the mummy. His previous experiences and the encounters of others had proven one thing: outsiders would not directly appear before the natives when they entered the book world. It required exploration before any contact was made. This was especially so for the first time. Therefore, Klein believed that the mummy was likely left somewhere uninhabited. And with this zombie's condition, it was likely to be engaging in a random walk. It would be difficult for it to explore in different directions autonomously like humans, elves, or giants. This also meant that, as long as he didn't drag it out, it wasn't likely for there to be any losses. Furthermore, it had only been about 3 minutes since Klein smeared the blood-soaked soil across the book's cover. Following the direction led by raw divination, Klein flew towards a nearby mountain peak. Soon, he came to a valley. At this moment, the Tuttensis II mummy wrapped in yellowish-brown bandages and was dyed red from liquids had appeared. It was still wearing the golden mask with patterns across it. Its throat was letting out an inhuman sound as it rushed over with wide strides. The surroundings turned gloomy. At the same time, many incomplete animal carcasses tore away the soil covering them in the valley as they staggered towards Klein. Having his spirit body augmented by Azek's copper whistle, Klein immediately chuckled. What a warm welcome! He unhurriedly threw away the branch and raised a blob of black matter. This was a Soul Assure's Beyonder characteristic which he had released from the mutated version of Creeping Hunger. At its core was pure shimmering light that looked like a night sky embedded with stars. Invisible waves spread out in a turbulent manner as the surroundings suddenly darkened as though night had fallen at once. The serene and peaceful feeling was accompanied by the fall of starlight. The animal carcasses first turned sluggish before collapsing, returning to their eternal rest. The mummy also slowed down its pace, its motions growing slower and slower. But it didn't lie back down. Directly using a Beyonder characteristic isn't very effective after all. Furthermore, the negative effects are nothing trivial. Klein couldn't help but cover his mouth with his left hand to yawn. He made Creeping Hunger turn pale and become dyed in a gloomy green. It used the power of a zombie to control the deceased in front of him. The two stacked Beyonder effects finally calmed the mummy down. With embedded onyx gems for eyes, it slowly walked to Klein's side and stood there silently as though it was the most professional servant. Unfortunately, it has hexes. From inside his spirit body, Klein immediately took out a golden bead with the styles of the ancient Highlands kingdom. On its surface was deeply engraved bluish-green patterns. It came from Sharon and was specially prepared for the Tuttensis II mummy. It could effectively suppress and put an end to the hexes. Otherwise, how could the wraith dare to cast her sights on the pharaoh mummy? After twiddling the golden bead, Klein made the Tuttensis II mummy open its mouth before stuffing the bead into the mask's gap where the mouth was. In just a few seconds, the gloominess of the surroundings vanished. After doing all of this, he took a step forward and, with his spirit body state, possessed the mummy. Then, without any hesitation, he ended the summoning and returned above the gray fog. This mummy had already become his zombie, allowing him to release it just like he did with his former marionette, Senor. There was no need for him to store it in his body. After doing a bestowment, the mummy, which was rich in spirituality, returned to the real world and arrived inside the cheap motel. After Klein cleaned up the traces, he reached out his right hand, about to grab the mummy's shoulder and teleport back to the 2-bedroom apartment where Merrick and Sharon were. But after taking a look at the oil-stained yellowish-brown bandages and the dark red liquid on it, Klein silently retracted his right hand and switched to using his gloved left hand. After holding the mummy's shoulder with his left hand, he immediately began to fade, and this effect quickly spread across his body. In just a flash, Klein and the mummy had returned to the apartment from before. He wasn't in a rush to open the door to present it to Sharon and Merrick. He took out his golden pocket watch and opened it. Another 36 seconds before it's 5 minutes. Klein made the mummy pull out a chair and sit down leisurely. After a while, he finally heard a knock on the door. "Come on in," Klein replied with a smile as he controlled the mummy to walk over. When the door creaked open, the thin figure with the golden, patterned mask and yellowish-brown bandages was reflected in the duo's eyes. This figure's onyx gems shimmered before it swiftly lay itself down on the ground. Momentarily, Sharon and Merrick were at a loss for words. Having already used a wall of spirituality to isolate Azek's copper whistle, Klein dispelled his control over the zombie and pointed at it with a smile. "I'm leaving the rest to you. And that brings the curtain down for my directed play," Klein commented inwardly as he silently took in the sensation of his potion rapidly digesting. This made him believe that it didn't need to take him up until the end of the year to consider the problem of advancing to the level of a demigod. It might be expedited by 2 or even 3 months. Furthermore, with this digestion, the number of marionettes he could control finally rose to 2. The maximum limit reached 200 meters. Faced with enemies with the same level of spirit body as his, gaining initial control of the target and completely converting them into a marionette was respectively reduced to 10 seconds and 150 seconds. The range had also been expanded to 10 meters. "You really succeeded." Merrick's eyes stared at the Tutensis II mummy as he couldn't help but mutter. He could never have imagined that they could succeed. Sherlock Moriarty had managed to successfully steal something 4 demigods, and 2 terrifying sealed artifacts were vying for. Furthermore, this gentleman had previously returned empty-handed. Could it be that the mummy had delivered itself? Deep inside Sharon's blue eyes, her emotions were concealed and they were completely calm. She scrutinized the target. After confirming that it was the pharaoh mummy and that it was Tutensis II, she cast her gaze to Sherlock Moriarty, who was seated with his legs crossed. She opened her mouth slightly before closing them. "Thank you. I'll mail you the corresponding payment. I'll wish you, all the best in everything," Klein replied sincerely. He then silently had a poignant thought. If Miss Sharon can successfully advance to Sequence 4, it means I'll have an additional demigod-level helper. The saying from the Footaholic Empire is apt: rely on your parents at home, depend on your friends when out. The more demigod-level friends, the merrier. Our tarot club needs to develop more friends and reduce our enemies. However, my enemies seem to be ever increasing. Having thought of that, Klein exhorted them. Be careful of being hunted down. The Tutensis II mummy had too many of its items in the lone military's possession. It was very simple for them to use Beyonder methods to lock onto it. Klein's paper angel interference was only effective for a limited amount of time. Of course, he believed that Sharon and Merrick were prepared, otherwise, they wouldn't have had thoughts on stealing the pharaoh's mummy. Likewise, he also believed that they could deal with the origins of the gray metal masks and special fireworks. If it's Danitz, he would most likely say, "It didn't cross my mind." Klein did a comparison with a particular hunter failure. Sharon nodded, indicating that she would take note. Then, she made the Tutensis II mummy into her zombie and brought it into the spirit world. "Thank you for your help." Merrick, who stayed behind in the room, exhaled. He composed his surging emotions and bowed at Sherlock Moriarty. Following that, he left the room, removed his disguise, and blended into the crowd in East Borough. During this process, Klein remained sitting in his chair as he silently watched them leave. At some point in time, his figure also vanished. In an apartment near Pritz Harbor, the lone military's golden-eyed demigod entered and said to his partner, the lady in the evening gown, "Nothing for now." "That's expected. If he wasn't certain of success, that mysterious person wouldn't have come to steal the Tutmosis II mummy," the lady said in a heavy voice. "However, we can relax our investigation scope. Those fireworks, that mask, those clothes, and that taunting bow should lead us to something." She was certain that the Tutmosis II mummy's loss wasn't done by the Two Rose school of thought demigods. If it was part of their plan, there was no need for them to carry out that step only when they were in dire straits. They had almost failed to escape. The golden-eyed demigod nodded and said, "I had a premonition that something would happen, but unfortunately, we didn't work with the churches for this operation. We didn't have enough manpower." He paused and asked, "Have you figured out what method that mysterious person used?" The lady held up the crown of thorns and stabbed a thorn into her neck. As blood trickled down, she shook her head. "Perhaps the removing of the soil with the Tutmosis II mummy's bodily fluid is a ritual. This is a very cunning fellow who's good at deceit,"